Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education, a podcast that focuses on what is happening in education today, connecting everyone to the movers and shakers that are breaking boundaries in the education arena.
Hello and welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education. This is Jamie Saponaro here with Jerry Kimball, and we're talking about the 8 trends that will impact education in 2021. So the pandemic certainly has affected education in 2020, of course. And now we're asking, what's next? How will education be impacted this year in 2021? What are we looking at here? What do we have to deal with? So to help us take a look at the trends that are on the 2021 radar screen, we brought in an educational researcher to let us know what those current trends are revealing for us.
Right. So today we have with us Naaz Modan, and she is an educational reporter, and she recently published an article that was called 8 Trends That Will Impact Education in 2021. And the article really caught my eye. I always like to look out and see what are the trends, what's going to be on the roadmap ahead. And I found her article to be absolutely fascinating. And so we are blessed today to have Naaz with us. So welcome, Naaz. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me here.
You bet. Well, you know, Jamie and I are educators, and we've done action research in the past. But we're really fascinated by your job as an educational reporter. So can you tell us what you do and how you discover these trends? Who do you talk to? How do you do your research? Just give us a little background, if you will.
Sure. My job is really just to keep an ear on the ground. And in that job, really, I speak to everybody from educational researchers, policy researchers, to, on the ground, the people who are actually immersed in the education field. So district leaders, teachers, principals. So really anybody, you name it, anything that impacts the education industry, I'd be speaking to them.
So to determine these 8 trends, do you interview them and read research and then kind of distill out what you think the next trends will be? How does that happen?
Yeah, it's, reporting is a little bit like a combination of both. Doing my own research, staying up to date with the latest policies, the latest research, as well as talking to people about their own experiences, what they think is going on day to day in the classroom, in the board meetings, things like that.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, I would like to jump in because really we want to just hit on each of these 8 trends that you're seeing and talk just a little bit about them. And if you can kind of give us the Reader's Digest version of what you see is happening. So the first trend was vaccine navigation. And there's been a lot on the news lately because the new director of the CDC was saying that teachers may not need vaccines to return to school soon. Teachers unions are saying, wait a minute, we don't know if we want teachers there. So what did you find out as you were looking at vaccine navigation?
Yes, the press secretary did say, quote unquote, that it's premature to talk about requiring vaccines as a condition to return to school. But increasingly, the research is showing that schools are not sort of super spreaders, so to speak. Children are lower risk at getting COVID-19. And if schools are following the correct, safety precautions, masks 6 feet apart, schools seem to be safe to return to, of course, depending on, the local spread rates and things like that. But of course, with anything new, the question is really, at a certain point, will vaccines be required? We know already that districts do require some vaccines for kids to even attend school. But right now, what I'm hearing is district leaders are really taking it day by day and first waiting to see, before they even might require a vaccine, waiting to see what their state leaders might say or do, and then sort of follow their lead. When it comes to returning to school, we've been hearing a lot about, teachers unions and what they, might want in a return to school. So what are, some conditions of reopening? And in some places we have heard that teachers want to be vaccinated. They either require or strongly prefer being vaccinated before coming face to face for in-person learning. And it's not just teachers, it's also, the whole school community, bus drivers who are, older in some cases and maybe more at risk. So it's really, the conversation around vaccines and requirements really change based on locality, who the community is, where they're located, what the spread is like, what their political views might be, and things like that.
You bet. And I think schools, teachers are really good at following the direction that they've been given. And so they do abide by the guidelines. And I think that has really kept COVID from spreading in schools, is just that they are following the guidelines. And we appreciate that they're doing that. Well, the second one was school models. And oh my goodness, we've talked about this one forever. We've still been in that industrial age model for so many years. And I think COVID kind of flipped us on this. The industrial age model, I mean, kids in rows with a teacher at the front of the classroom, that kind of model. What kind of models are you seeing may happen now due to the pandemic?
When schools first went remote, and kids were logging in, from their laptops or cell phones, it was a shock, so to speak, to the system. Mm-hmm. Ed tech was slowly being incorporated prior to the pandemic. There was a push for teachers and district leaders to incorporate it in their day-to-day. But once the pandemic hit, it was just like that. Right. You went from 0 to 100. And what we found is, while it was difficult in some places to switch to a remote learning model, there actually are, some kids who are thriving. Yes. Some kids who may even prefer, the remote kind of setting, logging in online. And so increasingly, I'm hearing district leaders saying that, this kind of laptop learning might be here to stay. Parents might want it down the road. In fact, a recent RAND survey actually showed, I think about 1 in 5 districts are actually talking about incorporating technology long-term into their, into their strategy, into their portfolio. So,
and you said 1 in 5?
Yes.
I'm kind of surprised. I thought that number might be higher.
So with respect to assessment and accountability, will states continue to enforce these assessments and the accountability that were in place? Will things stay the same pre-pandemic? Will they go back to that? Or do you think there'll be some adjustments?
And is this for 2021 or?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So for 2021, there definitely, are some changes on the horizon. States have been asked to, submit their accountability addendum applications by February 1st. While that deadline has been extended, states are definitely working on changing some things within accountability, like measures and things like that. In some states, they're actually even requesting waivers, another round of waivers for assessments.
Okay.
And, under Betsy DeVos, the former education secretary, while she did say that another round of assessment waivers won't be granted, under this new administration, under Biden's administration, that's still up in the air. Will he follow in Betsy DeVos's footsteps and, require states to continue on with their standardized assessments? Or maybe will he change it and say, this year's still, different than all the rest. And it makes more sense to just cancel assessments for this year. He could go in that direction. We really don't know right now, but that is one of the earliest decisions, or one of the earlier decisions that the new education secretary will have to make.
I'm sure that is a big question, one of the top priority questions on that list for sure. So Naaz, earlier you mentioned that some students are thriving in the laptop learning environment. But also, on the other hand, there are some students who are struggling. There is learning loss. Some students are failing. They're struggling with respect to their social growth. And in fact, most teachers around the world are trying to compensate with a lot of infused social and emotional learning into their lessons and curriculum because of that. So what are your research findings in this area with respect to learning loss and social growth recovery?
When schools first closed, there was this concern that students were displaying more signs of mental health concerns like anxiety, like depression. And in those first few months, what I heard was this kind of uptick from districts in interest in SEO, an interest in putting in place, mental health programs. Even just teachers were reaching out to students, calling them, checking in on them. One of the first things they may ask in the classroom is, "Hey, how are you?"
Yes.
And, just a few months ago, the Trump administration was pushing to reopen. And one of the top things they cited was, these mental health concerns of students. At the same time, there are students who are struggling academically. Early results from MAP testing shows that there are students lagging in math in grades 3 through 8. And these lags may actually be worse for traditionally marginalized students. And those concerns are, exacerbated by the fact that many students aren't actually showing up to test. So even these early results, that are showing, learning losses in math, they might not be the full picture. The students that, may need the help the most are actually not testing. So we don't know where they are. And maybe the only way to know is, when they come back in person. But
that's a struggle. That's certainly a struggle. The data is only good as what is being provided and what's being collected. So that is tough. And, sometimes it's going to probably will have to be some individualized assessments in those cases.
Going right along with the social, emotional, and people, how they're reacting to the pandemic, we had Dr. Rick Dole on a few episodes back, and he works for the state of Kansas helping administrators get into the field of superintendency. And he reported that there's a potential tripling of vacancies at the superintendent level. Are teachers leaving the profession too? Are we finding, is this something that's happening throughout the profession?
When schools first closed in the months following, I was hearing sort of a back and forth. On one hand, I was hearing from researchers that teachers aren't leaving at rates expected, perhaps because of the economy turning downward. Now, in the past few months, AFT actually put out a survey saying that 1 in 3 teachers may be considering exiting the profession early, and that is as a direct result of the pandemic.
Right. And I would think that age and being more susceptible probably adds into that if they're leaving early, retiring early, that kind of thing. Yes. So we're also hearing about teacher burnout. What's leading to the teacher burnout?
Teachers have their own families. They have their own concerns, their own health concerns. So on one hand, there so much is being asked of them right now. They're playing, in some cases, psychologist or therapist or school counselor, as well as being, a full-time teacher. In some districts, districts tried putting in place models where teachers would work both in person, maybe go in person 1 or 2 days out the week, but then they would also be teaching remotely to, another cohort of kids. So that back and forth could also be leading to burnout in some cases. It is, important to point out, though, that some districts that tried that early on did backtrack and are now trying to work with models that may, separate teachers who work strictly in person versus teachers who work strictly remotely. So
right. It's a tall order. And if you are home, you are never leaving your job. Your job is there all the time. So I think it's particularly hard if you are working remotely and trying to do the in-person as well. Yeah. Tough times.
All right. So what about social justice and anti-racist practices? When I'm on Twitter, I am finding so many fantastic resources to support the deficits that exist, the gaps that teachers have in the resources that exist for them in their curriculum. So how are schools addressing social justice issues now? What are new policies that are possibly coming about, perhaps?
Right after the summer protests that just passed following the passing of, Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, the immediate reaction for some school districts was to actually, discuss no longer employing SROs in their schools, SROs as in school resource officers. They said, in some cases it could make the environment less, less threatening, more comforting for students, especially students of color. On the other hand, there are discussions that, school resource officers can actually bring about a positive culture if they are well trained. And so a lot of things that I'm hearing now is actually focusing in and honing in on those kind of training resources. And not just SROs, there are many districts right now that are going through policy audits on everything from dress codes to, who is actually represented in those AP classes, who is, being disciplined, at higher rates, and how do we lower the rates of, punitive discipline for students of color?
That's so interesting that you say that, because we had Ken Shelton, who is very active in this area, on as our guest several months ago. And he told us a story about an SRO in a school where he was a substitute teacher. I think he was subbing. No, he may have been teaching at that time. But this guy was not about, obviously he was trying to establish and enforce rules, but at the same time, he made connections with students. He developed relationships with students. He made those connections that were so important, so that there wasn't this disconnect with discipline, and instead there was empathy involved. And I think that is what you're talking about here. It's about training. I think there's a shift in the mentality of who these supports should be. So they should be part of the faculty and not this isolated person here to enforce these rules, but instead really be a part of the entire community. I think it makes the difference. And just exactly what you said, training is the key to this. It's a re-envisioning of what this position is, for sure. And I think that's going to make a really big difference.
The other thing he said that I thought was profound was that really nothing changes until policies change.
Yes.
And that's what will change people. So I'm wondering, did you find that schools are beginning to look at new policies as far as social justice and making sure that it is in policy and not just a given?
Yeah, there are many district leaders that have told me that they are working directly with their boards and pushing their boards or working with their boards to adjust these policies. First, to, take a hard look at the policies in place right now and see how those might be contributing to this kind of school culture and practices that, disproportionately affect students of color, particularly Black and Hispanic students. So, the conversations seem to be ongoing right now. At the same time, district leaders are also grappling with other things like reopening schools and things like that. But it definitely seems to be a conversation that, at the very least is in the back of their mind. But it seems like a conversation that might be coming up, down the road.
So speaking of policies, what can we expect from a national level? Do we see the Biden administration making some policy shifts from what the Trump administration was doing as far as education? What's on the roadmap?
There definitely are some areas where the Biden administration has already come out and say, we're going to do things differently. Under the Trump administration, the education department did rescind some guidance from the Obama era administration, guidance around punitive discipline and, school discipline practices, and also guidance around, transgender students and their inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Now that the Biden administration, is in, he's already made it clear, him and Cardona being, the education secretary nominee, they have made it clear that on these particular issues, they differ. Many experts have said that, on the horizon, there may actually be the reinstituting of such guidance. So guidance around school discipline, and guidance around, transgender inclusion, in, school areas like, bathrooms, locker rooms, school teams, athletic teams. Another area that may change, but we're not really sure how yet exactly, are Title IX regulations. Last year, in August 2020, I believe, new Title IX regulations went into place. And, that completely overhauled how K-12, reports sexual assault, or sexual harassment, within the school system. So it's a little unclear, how that may change, whether it may change and when it could change. But that is certainly, something to look out for in 2021.
Right. And tell us a little bit about the new secretary. I know educators are always at the edge of their seat wanting to know about who is at the helm here. Is it an educator, a non-educator? What do you know about this new nominee?
Right. So the new nominee, his name is Miguel Cardona. Mm-hmm. He, has had a long history, a long career in education. He started out as an educator, rose to assistant superintendent in Connecticut. He is from Meriden, Connecticut, I believe. And then most recently, he was the education commissioner there. So he does, he seems very well versed when it comes to, the education sector, what are educator concerns, whether that's vaccinations, IDEA, Title I funding. He recently did have, a nomination hearing within the Senate Help Committee. And he was pretty much grilled by lawmakers on, questions related to, a whole gamut of topics. And while he did seem to sidestep some questions, in other areas, he really seemed to hit the nail on the head.
Yes, I think educators will be excited to have someone that's really been in education for a long time, and has that background. That seems to please educators. But the other thing I'm wondering is, can education expect some money being funneled in for some COVID relief to really kind of help bridge these gaps that they're seeing?
It's definitely a possibility. I mean, that is one of the first things, that lawmakers are trying to address. Biden came into this administration proposing, I believe, a 1.9 trillion plan, some kind of stimulus package. While it's still unclear how much of that will be, dedicated to specifically education, there are definitely serious talks about, another round of COVID funding. In the past packages, how that's been distributed is largely up to, local leaders based on
Mm-hmm.
need. And so whether that will be the case in, the next round is still, yet to be seen. But there definitely is another package in the works.
Oh, yes, that's good to know. So, Naaz, you've been in this business for how long?
Well, as an education reporter, about two years.
Wow. So year one and year two, have they been completely different, or?
Yes. Very different.
Yes.
First year, I, dipped my toes in the water. Second year, the water completely changed, I guess.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
But it's, just like everybody else, sort of just trying to go with the flow, learn as we go.
Right. I just loved your article because I felt like it really condensed everything down so that as educators, we can see what is on the roadmap ahead and the trends that we need to be looking at and paying attention to. So I really thank you for your good work in this area. Your article was fantastic. We will put it in the show notes so that people can access it as well. How can they follow you and find out more? Do you post about trends and things that you're seeing in education? Do you have a Twitter account? How can we keep up with things?
Yeah, you could definitely, stay up to date with the latest news, the latest trends on k12dive.com, as well as that Twitter handle, K12Dive News. You can also follow me on my Twitter handle is Naaz Modan, NaazModan.
This is great. I'm so happy that Jerry discovered you by finding this article, because these are the hot topics. These are the questions that educators want to know about. So this article and everything you've spoken about today on our podcast is really hitting the nail on the head for what we're looking for, what we're trying to find out about. So we really thank you for coming on and really digging in and helping us understand this a little bit better. And what are you working on now?
Sorry.
We don't have to. Is that okay?
I don't know if I can answer.
Oh, a secret. Oh, that's even more exciting. Oh, I love it.
Now we're really going to follow you.
We're following you now. Oh, that's exciting. Some secretive research that you're doing. All right, we're gonna get the pulse on that by following you for sure.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you so much for sharing everything, enlightening us, making us understand a little better, and allowing us to understand what's in the horizon for us. So we need to keep up with this, and now all of our audience is able to do that as well, and we'll continue to do that by following you. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. And if you would like to stay linked up, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube.